The TMT Learning Foundation respectfully acknowledges that we live, learn, and gather on the ancestral and traditional territories of the Treaty 7 nations, the Siksika, the Kainai, and Kainai of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Estonian Nakota nations, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goochestoni bands, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. We honor the original caretakers of this land, and we commit ourselves to relationships grounded in respect, learning, and reconciliation.
All right, so our Why Justice program is actually in collaboration with this organization called ActionDignity. And ActionDignity is a very big organization here in Calgary that works with different immigrant and minority groups in order for us to also fight for our rights, in fact, fight for our dignity and take action on it as well. So this program is part of their long series that is coming up. We're going to be addressing different topics, and TMT will be part of that. And so this is the very first one that we are doing. It's the Why Justice Talk. And so we also have Desiree, who is a representative from ActionDignity, and she will also be able to answer any questions if you want to get involved, if you want to volunteer. ActionDignity is an awesome organization. They have so much going on. I recommend just getting to know them better.
So good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to speak about the youth criminal justice system. There's a lot of information that I could share with you about the system. However, I only have 10 minutes, so I've tried to pull out the most important information that I'll share with you today. So I've worked in the criminal justice system for a long time. I've experienced it professionally and personally. So professionally, I've worked as a correctional officer with Renee here at the youth jail. I've worked as a probation officer in the community, and then I've also worked with the Calgary Police Service in their diversion and their gang prevention program. But before I got into working for the justice system, I was actually in the justice system. So let me tell you the story. So my parents immigrated to Canada from Africa with $20 in their pocket. So we grew up very poor. And so one day I made the decision to shoplift. And so I remember being handcuffed. I remember being taken to a back room, being questioned. So the police were called, and then I was questioned. I had a bad attitude. I didn't respond to their questions. I was not cooperative. And so what the police officers decided to do, they could have given me a warning, but instead, because I wasn't cooperative, they decided to criminally charge me. And so they gave me a court date, and I went to the court date with my parents. It was probably the most embarrassing and scary thing I've ever had to do. I went to court. I waited for the judge to call my name. I went up to the little box, and I waited for the judge to talk to me. And so the judge said, "Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" And I pleaded guilty because I shoplifted. And so the judge referred me to the program. It was called Alternative Measures at that time. And I had to meet an Alternative Measures officer, and they gave me 100 hours of community service. So that one decision changed my life. I was going down a wrong path. I could have continued going down that path, but I decided to turn around and change directions. I pursued an education in criminal justice so I can help youth make better choices and not make the same mistake that I'd made. So let's talk about, why do youth get involved in the criminal justice system? Does anyone know? Just yell some answers out. How about peer pressure? Peer pressure? That could be something. How about wanting to fit in? Yeah? Family stress, mental health, addictions, maybe poverty, boredom, hanging out with the wrong friends, trying to look cool, or needing money. So how does the youth justice system work? So the youth justice system is for youth between the ages of 12 to 17. And how it works is a youth will break the law, and then the police will be called. So when the police are called, they will ask questions because they want to try to build a story. What exactly happened here? And so they have some options. So they'll look at your criminal record, and if this is a first-time offense, they might just say, hey, we're going to refer you to diversion program. That could be a warning, or that could be something like a referral to a program. Or, like me, I wasn't cooperating, so they criminally charged me. So when you get charged, what they do is they give you a court date, and they possibly could give you some conditions. So some conditions could look like report to a probation officer. You may have to go to school. You may have a curfew. So you have to be home every day at 9 o'clock because somebody might be checking. And then you may not be able to have contact with some of your friends if they were involved in the crime that you did. And so now they've given you a court date and you have to go to court. So when you go to court, you could have your own lawyer, or you can go to the third floor at the courthouse and talk to legal aid and they will represent you. So you and your parent or your guardian will have to sit inside court. You may have to wait 10 minutes. You may have to wait 4 hours until your name is called, and then approach the box. You wait until the judge talks to you. However, what frequently happens is you may get another court date, and you may have to go a couple times before the judge may say, how do you plead? Do you plead guilty or do you plead not guilty? And if you plead not guilty, then there'll be a trial date. If you plead guilty, then you'll get a date for sentencing. And there are quite a few sentencing options. Now, when we talk sentencing, there's some that do not give you a youth criminal record, and there's some that do give you a youth criminal record. So let's talk about the ones that do not. So the ones that do not is a reprimand, which is a verbal warning. There's also a discharge. So that could be an absolute discharge where the judge says, okay, I'm just discharging this charge. Then there's conditional discharge where you can have some conditions. So you may see a probation officer, you may have to follow this order, and if you complete it successfully, they'll discharge the charges. Now you have the sentences that do give you a youth criminal record. So that is a fine, which is a financial payment, restitution compensation, which is a payment to the victim for harm that was caused, community service hours, which is unpaid community work for some certain amount of hours. Then you have a probation order, which again, we talked about some conditions, curfew, attend school, you need to reside with your parents, and your probation officer will be checking on that. So they could be talking to your parent, your school, whatever supports are involved with you. And if you don't comply, you could get additional charges. And then we have an attendance order, which is an attendance program, so it could be school or counseling. And then we have intensive support and supervision program, which is a community order, but it just has more supports and programs in place on that order. Then we have the jail-based sentences, which is deferred custody and supervision order, custody and supervision order, and intensive rehabilitation and custody and supervision order. So the first one, which is deferred custody, is a jail-based sentence, but you do it in the community. And then the custody and supervision order, which is 1/3 in the jail, 2/3 in the community. So you also have some strict conditions. And then intensive rehabilitation and custody and supervision order is for serious violent offenses, again in jail, and then there's a community piece. So we talked about youth records and what sentences would give you a youth record. So what you need to know is if you have a youth record, that record doesn't stay open forever, but only if you stay out of trouble. So if you continue to get charge after charge after charge, it potentially could stay with you when you're an adult. And then while it's open, it could affect you getting a job. So sometimes when you're filling out an application form for jobs, it'll ask you, are you bondable or are you not bondable? And so if you've been sentenced with one of those charges we talked about that gives you a criminal record, you are not bondable, which means you cannot work with money. And then it also could impact volunteering. So how do you stay out of the criminal justice system? So some examples are go to school, hang out with some positive friends, sports and activities, have a mentor. If you need someone to talk to, you can connect with a counselor. You can volunteer. If you're 15 years old, you can work. And healthy lifestyle. For example, after school, you can go to the gym. And then routines. And if you don't know what programs are out there, you can always call 211. 211 is a great resource. You can call them and say, hey, I'm looking for a counselor. This is what I'm struggling with. Do you have any ideas? And they will be like, yep, we know exactly who you can call. You can call the Calgary Counseling Center, or you can call the Distress Center. If you're not sure and you want to start working and you're 15 years old and you don't have a resume, you can call 211 and be like, hey, I'm a student, I'm 15 years old, and I want to look for work I need a resume, what do? They'll be like, hey, you can go to the Youth Employment Center. They'll help you out. So 211 is a great resource. If you ever need anything, you can call them. So let's go back to if you ever get in trouble, what you need to remember. So what matters is your behavior. So how you act in custody, how you interact with the police, how you do in court, it's all being noted. And during sentencing, the judge may ask, how was this person? How did they behave? Your efforts also matter. Are you going to school? Are you volunteering? Are you working? What have you done to make a difference, to change your life? That again, the judge might ask during sentencing and say, hey, what have you done? They might, ask a probation officer to write a report. And in that report, that probation officer will talk to your parents, will talk to you, will talk to your teacher, will talk to whatever supports are in play, like whoever you're working with. And then your choices matter for sentencing, but also for the future. And I think one thing that we need to remember as well is that if you don't understand something in the criminal justice system, ask questions. And if it's not working for you, speak up. You get a voice, so make sure you speak up. And the last message I want to leave for you is one mistake does not define you, but what you do next does. Thank you.
Oh, good job. So hi everyone, Renee Clement. I have worked at the Calgary Young Offender Centre for the past 16 and a half years now. So I have been there a long time. You young folks in the room probably longer than you've been alive now. That's my new stick every time somebody comes into custody, that I have been in that centre for a long time. The wording of our building has changed. Within the past few years, we've also added an adult side of the centre as well. So our staff are required to both work on the youth side and the adult side. For my presentation, I'm solely focusing right now on what we do on the youth side and what that experience looks like for everybody on that side, and then what we're trying to do to bring that community connection piece back and how we're trying to support, as Ismat talked briefly about, that reintegration back into the community and what that looks like from a center perspective. So this is what our building looks like. It has been around since 1988. We currently have about 45 youth in custody. When I started in 2009, we were sitting at just over 100 youth. And so with the implementation of the YCGA in the early 2000s, it's taken a little bit to adopt and implement some of those changes, but our youth population has dropped pretty significantly since then. Okay, so it is harder to come into custody, but I also find then once you enter the system, it is harder to get out of the system. Okay, once you come into custody, if there's any breaches or things that happen, it is easier to come back into custody and then stay into custody with that system. So what it looks like for our center, the Young Offender Center, so you need to either be remanded on charges or sentenced to stay at CYOC. We house youth who have committed any offenses between the ages of 12 and 17. So Ismat touched on that age. Those ages are set out for youth under the YCGA. If there is a charge committed during that time, we will house people up until their 20th birthday. So at that point in time, when somebody turns 20 is when we start to adjust or integrate them into the adult system. So we have 2 units. Just that age between 12 and 20 is already a stretch enough to have to house anybody older than that in our system. We do have male and female youth in our system. The majority at this point in time are male youth. So what it looks like to actually come into custody. So Ismat talked about the court process itself, okay? If something were to happen, there's charges that occur, you go into court, and a judge talks to you. So they decide if you are able to be released or if you are going to stay into custody. And so the judge has to consider these specific factors if they're going to keep somebody in custody. So there needs to be a serious charge. Or a pattern of finding of guilt, okay? So like Ismat said, if you start to breach a probation order or what that looks like, then they're going to consider the number of charges that you have as a factor to decide whether or not to keep you or put you in custody or let you back out into the community. Likelihood that somebody won't attend court. So if you have missed a previous court date, the court is very specific in that they need people to appear on those dates. So that is a reason somebody could come into custody, to ensure that they'll appear on on their court dates. They talk about detention being necessary to protect the public, and no conditions of release would reduce some of those risks. And so with that, a judge needs to decide, what that release plan might look like for somebody. And if there is conditions that they can release somebody under, then they need to consider all of those community-based options before keeping somebody in custody. But this is what they take into account when they're deciding whether or not somebody is being remanded. So remanded is dealing with those court cases before you've been found guilty or before you've pled guilty on or not guilty on those charges. And then the second way that you could come into custody is that you get sentenced to custodial time. So Ismat, again, talked about that very briefly, but we talk about youth sentences need to be 2/3 in custody, 1/3 in the community. And that ties into that reintegration piece. I'll touch on it a little bit at the end. But if you're sentenced to 3 months for something, you are going to spend 2 months at CYOC and then 1 month in the community under conditions. So we're going to decide with your team of supports what those conditions would look like for you. But essentially, it's an opportunity to serve your custody time in the community. So to see if you can do okay for the rest of that sentence and then reintegrate back into the community before your sentence is complete. So that is how, with the YCGA, that is how they've adopted this new model for youth sentences. So all of them keep this custody piece. If those conditions are breached, we could bring you back into custody and you could spend the remainder of that time there. But the hope is that with those conditions that we plan for you based on your case, that you would stay out of custody for those. So the CYOC experience, what this looks like if somebody is remanded or they're sentenced into custody, for us as staff, this is our perspective. It is really difficult. We understand that it's very difficult for somebody to be removed from the community. Okay, somebody is going to come into custody, have all of their personal effects taken away. So no cell phone, none of the clothes that you like to wear. They wear matching sweatsuits in there, so we all look very normal, and it's just our property that is in the center for safety of the whole building. But we try and keep that normal routine. I say that knowing that everybody's daily routine is quite different, but the hope is that if we have you doing a normal routine of you attending high school every day, then going back out into the community isn't going to be as big of an adjustment. So what that looks like on a day-to-day basis, especially on a Monday to Friday when school is running. You wake up, you have a shower, we have breakfast, your rooms are expected to be nice and clean. We have a high school that runs in the center. So you are expected and you have to attend high school all day. That is a really big piece of that reintegration piece, is having that education, some of those supports behind you in hopes that there won't be any more crimes committed. So education is a really big component of our center. At the end of the day, you go back to your unit, there's dinner, we expect chores to be done, so everybody gets to participate in cleaning. We have programming, so we have a ton of community agencies that come in every evening to support our youth to find some of those community connections, find a hook that's going to work with somebody inside of custody in hopes that, they find something that they like in the community to help keep them out. We have some time on the unit. We have a courtyard. We have television. We have free time, and then that's when you would make some phone calls to your family. So again, no personal effects, no cell phones. You use our phones, and we approve who you can talk to during that. So it is very structured, but again, for a very specific reason, in that we're hoping that reintegration piece comes into it. So the only people you can talk to in custody is your guardian or immediate family. Any of your professional supports. So we know that professional supports are key. They can come anytime during the week to visit. So if you have a group home, any therapists, school supports can come in, lawyers can come in at any time, and you would be able to go visit them. Family visitations only happen on Saturdays and Sundays. And then a big piece of that too is that while you're in custody with our caseworkers, we are trying to find you some new community connection. So what is going to work for you? We have agencies that come in and we look to send out some of those referrals. So Ismat talked briefly about some of what that might look like, or that community piece, but we're always trying to find somebody that you can connect with. This is just quickly what a room would look like. So you do have a window. We actually it's a nice spot. You can see, outside, but we expect your beds to be nice and made and your room to be kept neat and clean. So you can have, reading books, clothing, school books, some canteen, some extra food, and that is what you are allowed in your room. And then I talked briefly about that evening programming time. So community connection is huge for us in the center. That is always our goal, is to keep people out of custody again. So these are, I'm not going to list them all, but these are all agencies that are community-based agencies that come in and work with youth in the evenings at CYOC. So something like the John Howard Society is able to meet with youth both in custody and in the community. They provide mentorship, they provide specific mentorship. Something like Gloves Not Guns is working to keep youth out of both the gang and criminal lifestyle by implementing a boxing program, looking for something that youth can have a little bit of fun, do something to keep them active. We have music programs if music is your hook, and these agencies provide these services free of charge. So that is a big piece, is that we know that there is barriers to accessing supports in the community. So these specific agencies that we have come in provide those supports in custody at no cost, and then in the community at no cost, through grants and funding that they specifically get. So anything like that, we're always looking for a hook, and that is the goal of CYOC. So the goal of the YCGA in itself really is rehabilitation and reintegration. So that piece of rehabilitation for us, if anybody comes into custody, we are trying to figure out how we can help not happen again. So addressing those underlying reasons that somebody is committing crime. So Ismat talked about them really briefly. What are some of those reasons? Peer supports, is addictions an issue? So if something like addictions is an issue, I'm going to pair you up with Alcoholics Anonymous or something like that in the community. But I'm also going to find something for you in the community when you get back out, so that you can try and keep that connection going. And then that second piece is reintegration. So supporting youth going back into the community. So we're going to bring a team of supports together to come up with a plan to try and come up with some conditions. You need to have conditions, again, staying away from some of those negative peers, being home by a certain point in time so that you're not out too late. That tends to be when people get into trouble together. And then supporting that transition back into the community, of course, with the goal that anybody who enters the system is not coming back into it. So how can we make sure that somebody is successful if they do enter the criminal justice system? So I'm happy to answer questions afterwards, but thank you guys.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for the invitation, for the welcome. My name is Lizette Tejada. I'm an MLA, that means member of the Legislative Assembly of Alberta, and so I was elected in 2023, and it's been an exciting time in Alberta politics, but it was also a long journey here. And so I'm an opposition member. That means I'm a member of the NDP caucus. I like to focus on the multiculturalism piece, and how we can create welcoming spaces, how we can make things accessible for people. Justice is one of those big issues. We grew up exceptionally poor, and that meant that, often there was a struggle to put food on the table, to pay rent, and because of not being from Canada originally, there was a lot of challenges involved in sort of figuring out, who do I go to if I need help for this thing or that thing? And, if you were in an affordability impacted situation, which we were, there's a lot of struggles that come with that. My father was an alcoholic, and we were in a situation where there was domestic violence. So pretty difficult upbringing. And at the time, because my mother didn't have command of the English language, she didn't understand what she had, where her rights sat, right? What she could do about the situation that she was in. Eventually, we were able to leave that situation. It became quite unsafe, and she was going to, I heard it mentioned legal aid earlier, so she was going to legal aid lawyers, and still navigating language issues. I was 14, I was her translator, right? And so the way all of that impacts the work that I do now is I'm always thinking about root causes. So they talked a little bit about, you know, what can lead to an interaction with law enforcement, right? And all of the processes that are involved there. And I'm really thankful for all the work that you all do. I know in the previous NDP government, which was 2015 to 2019, I think we were on the verge of closing the Young Offender Center. And I think
we were, yeah.
Yeah, and that was avoided, right? And so I think there's a lot of really important work that comes on that end of the Young Offender Center, knowing how to navigate, going to court, you know, who do you go to for help, and then the perspective that has been shared with me from various multicultural organizations and immigrant serving organizations like Center for Newcomers is how to make all of that accessible to multicultural communities who might either not speak the language, it's, you know, different traditions, maybe parents are really busy and they're working 2 or 3 jobs, they don't have time to be at home to be sort of monitoring the situation. And so the work that we do in our caucus focuses a lot on advocating for how to make things more accessible. And the work that the government caucus does as well. They have a Minister of Immigration and Multiculturalism. They've recently just switched roles. Mohammed Yassin is now Associate Minister of Multiculturalism. And so he's focused a lot on language, on access to programming so that people can connect better. Because I think what we look at in our caucus, and I see this in health, in education, in the justice system, in my limited access to that particular file, is root causes and social determinants of justice, of health, and all of those things, right? And so some of the things that we focused on is how well supported are families. And some of that is through funding of food programs, obviously access to language. We're talking a lot about how there have been massive cuts right now to language programs, right? And if you don't have command of the language, how are you going to understand, you know, all these systems that you're suddenly interacting with or coming up against or seeking help from? And so I've been very lucky with the organizations that I've worked with. Center for Newcomers is one. They have a youth program. And a lot of these organizations will then report back to us as politicians, these are the things that we're up against, right? We're seeing that kids aren't getting help in school for language. That means they're not having like a great understanding of sort of what expectations are in the community. They're not getting enough help at home. Mom and dad are both working. They're struggling. And then just that connection piece with community is we're humans, right? We're always going to look for who we can connect with and, you know, who we can form those bonds with. And I know that we were mentioning sometimes we form bonds with perhaps people that might not have our best interests at heart, or they might have a different background. We don't know what motivates people sometimes. Just thinking personally to like an experience of almost shoplifting, being with a group of friends and not knowing actually what had happened. That there was one in the group of us that was shoplifting, and then all of a sudden there was like a rush to get out of there. And with this particular friend that I had, I found that was happening more and more. Like we had a lot of fun together, but suddenly I was, you know, she was hanging out with folks who were coming up against the justice system a lot, right? Luckily, I was pretty nerdy and a bit of a scaredy cat. So I was like, I'm going to go back home. I'm going to go do my homework. My mom is looking for me. And I had a very strict mother who was always on me, but also had some of that time to sort of be checking on me all the time, right? And not everyone has that. And I think part of that connection piece, I know it was mentioned here, some of the programs that come on the other side of being in the justice system, right? So all of those community programs that kids, I wanted to take a picture, but then I was like, okay, I'm not sure if I should take pictures. But a lot of the ones mentioned there, I know that you mentioned 211, those are excellent resources when you're looking for help, you're looking for how to connect with others. And there are other organizations within Alberta that I think most people maybe won't be aware of. There's the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate. And so they do a lot around policy, around informing politicians on both sides about what's happening on the ground with young people. And so they have they do a report every year. They do recommendations for where we can have better access to justice, where maybe funds should be allocated. Like recently we were just in a debate about providing supports to people who have been in the foster system and how it used to be given out until age 24 and now has been moved back to age 22. And so they will highlight things like this as okay, this is a risk. We need to be looking after our young people, because even if you're an adult, and I'm the mother of an 18-year-old who keeps telling me she's an adult, we know that people who are young still need that support, either from the adults around them or looking for community organizations and looking into community initiatives to have that support. And so just to talk a little bit about finding connection with each other, finding the right people to find connection with, volunteering was mentioned. That's so important. But also just knowing what you have access to as Albertans. So you might be under 18, you might be a young person, but something that's really, really important to know is that your voices and your experiences matter. That's why things like the OCYA, Office of Youth and Justice Advocate, exist. There's places like the Kids Help Phone. There's all sorts of services that you can be referred to through 211. But also just knowing that somebody like me, as an MLA, it is actually a miracle that I got to this place. Statistically, I should not be here. We lived very poor. We had a lot of challenges growing up. And one of the things that I was very lucky to have through my mother was an interest in volunteering, but also finding out why is this happening? You know, why is my mother's wage so low when she works so hard? Why are we coming up against these challenges when we're trying to access services? And that's all done through policy at the government level. And all of you have like a perspective and a voice to offer. And we live in a democracy where you have access to your political representatives. And even just emailing your representative and telling them what you're experiencing, and emailing both sides of the aisle, right? I think the better informed we are by the experiences that you're having, the better equipped we are to make policy that impacts you in a good way. And so I didn't have a prepared speech. I was talking a little bit about some of the work we do. But really, I would say knowing that you are your own best advocate, looking at who's in your community, finding those connections within your community, and talking about what your experiences are, and then talking to the politicians who want to get elected by you, but also want to know how to make life better, right? And I would say that that's true of us on both sides. We want to know how to make your lives better. And the only way we can do that is through conversations with you. Yeah, thank you.
So we're going to go into the question and answer segments. And so this part we wanted to, because this is the main event, right? Which is an opportunity for us to hear your voices, to hear your questions, both parents and kids actually, and youth, because everyone, like you said, everyone's voice matters. Right? So yeah, is there anyone who has questions that they would like to start us off with?
Yeah, here. What's your question?
How many of the youths actually stay out of the correctional facility, like when you let them out?
Well, yeah, again, I think I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, now that our numbers are low, so we have about 45 youth in custody. Once you start to enter the system, it is harder and harder to stay out of the system. Once you're sort of flagged in the court system that you have been in jail, sometimes it's harder to come up with those conditions where I briefly touched on, now how many charges do you have? Now are you higher risk to be let out? So that is statistically, it's pretty high. We do tend to see some of the same youth over and over again, and that's just, based on some of those initial charges or their circumstances. So sentence-wise, once you get sentenced, if we can find those good conditions and keep you out, that is where we see the most success.
So basically, just don't even go in there in the first place? Right.
I have a question. What's the stats when it comes to people of color that are in jail?
It's high. It's high. We certainly have an overrepresentation in custody on both sides, and it's hard to say why in terms of circumstances are different. And so we've always talked about, or historically we've talked about the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate, and we've focused very much on the Indigenous population because that has always historically been overrepresentation. But we have noticed and have tried to adapt as a center as well to that. We can't control on the court side who is coming into custody and what that looks like, but trying to adapt custodial wise in how do we respond to now an overrepresentation, and how do we get supports and services that maybe we didn't have or didn't used to have. So there is absolutely an overrepresentation.
My question is for you, Ismail.
Yeah.
What would you say is like the primary reason you tend to end up in the justice system? Like, I think about shoplifting being one of them, because I also, how do you say? I have a story of a very expensive Mentos that I took because I was hungry and I just wanted to eat Mentos. Cost me $500.
Yeah.
Definitely scared me straight. But what would you say is one of the primary reasons that youth tend to find themselves in this system?
And I don't know if there's one primary reason, but I think the ones that we see the most is poverty, addictions. Jump in whatever you want, Renee. But I would say those two would probably be the most, and maybe peer pressure and friends.
Right.
I would be the top three. Would you agree?
I think they're all connected. Honestly, I think they all sort of interchange. I don't think that there is one alone. You can have some friends that are negative and be able to find your way out or stay out of that trouble. But if a youth is experiencing both poverty because parents are making low wages, and so they do have friends and they're all experiencing that same circumstance together, and maybe are using drugs or have started using some type of substances within that too, then they're motivated to see like, okay, how can I make some quick money? And that tends to be so that money motivation piece too, to either help their family or help get what maybe they want as extras that they've seen on the social media lifestyle. And so it tends to collectively be all of those things together that I've found, at least that reach the point where they're staying in custody with us.
Can I just add a little bit to that? I think that is one of the key pieces, right, is funding for programs that support families and support kids. And so that can be funding in education, funding of things like breakfast programs, funding of all of those programs that address the pain points that can lead to, I always say there's always a reason behind someone's action. Maybe it's not always the right one, but one thing I hear about a lot is just that struggle with affordability, right?
How long does the record stay open for?
For a youth record? So there's two types of offenses under the criminal code. I'll try not to go overly in depth about them, but there's something, the Crown decides, okay, most charges to go by summary conviction or by indictable. And summary means that it's something more minor. We're looking at something like a shoplifting charge where it is a smaller item. They all fall under this theft under category, but it's something smaller as opposed to maybe a car where it still might be under $5,000, but they might choose to go by way of indictment, which means it's more serious. So if it's, and this is a good, if you're ever in that situation, to know, to talk to a lawyer, to talk to your probation, to make sure you know how they proceeded. So if it's a summary offense, at the end of the last day of your sentence, so a probation order, anything like that, at the end of the last day, it is 2 years to stay. You have to be crime-free for 2 years, so no fail to comply, no nothing new that you've picked up. 2 years, and then for an indictable offense, it is 5 years. So you have to have completed and then stay out of trouble for 5 years, and then your record will go away.
And I think there's also, Renee, you probably know this, let's just say you complete your youth record, you're waiting the 2 years, but now you've committed another crime and your youth record actually doesn't close, I don't think.
Yes. So you have to have that time period where there's no new offenses. If in that time period you turn into an adult and something happens, then your youth record stays open indefinitely.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize that.
Yep.
I do have a question, actually, in terms of age, because we're talking about youth, and automatically my brain goes to 18 and younger. But I do know there's some situations where it can go up to 21. There's like that buffer. Is it buffer room that you'd call it? I guess that is my question. Is there any? Can you give maybe some clarifications around that? Anyone?
I have never heard.
There is no buffer zone in the justice system, unfortunately. It's so
they can stay in.
They can, yeah. So you have to be in the youth system. You need to be between the ages of 12 and just before the day before your 18th birthday to be considered a youth to go through the youth system. Once you turn 18, it is an adult charge, an adult sentence. If something happens while you're 17 and you turn 18 or you turn 19 and you're still in the youth system and you haven't had any new adult offenses, we will still keep you in the youth system until 20. And so it's interesting because there is always discussions about that. And I know that comes up with the Office of the Child and Youth Advocate and the agency support. So there's lots of community-based programs that are for youth supports, but they will go up to the age of 24 and they will use some more of that data that is coming to say, we know that the brain isn't fully developed until 25 and we know that research, but because we've considered the age of adulthood to be 18 and, voting and some of those other things, that is what our youth system goes with.
I think it's hard to talk about youth justice, and this is one thing that's been been in my head, and not talk about gang and how, part of a lot of what their number one target is youth. Mainly because, again, they're underage and all that other stuff. I guess my question for all of you is, what kind of work is going into, I want to say, bringing awareness to youth that, hey, outside of just don't join the gangs, but how do you say no if you're being tapped? Being trafficked, being called, being invited to be pimps, that attraction is there. But there's some kids who are I don't want this, but I don't know how to say no. So what kind of, how would you and what role does that play in kids then entering into the youth justice, into the system, basically?
I think one thing that's really important is education. I think there's some awareness out there and there's some good work happening, and I can't remember the organization that's doing it, Action something. Anyways, so they are bringing awareness about exploitation, about, this pimping. They're trying to get out there because some of this stuff happens in malls, right? And they're looking for those vulnerable people that are sitting in the cafeteria, not the cafeteria, the food court, and they'll know who they need to target. So I think that's one of the most important things, I would say.
thank you also very much for sharing your knowledge, for
thank you.
joining us in this conversation. I think we've all learned a lot. We've seen some of the gaps. And our hope and our goal is that we're able to every one of us is able to take the information that we've learned today and start doing something to advocate for some of these gaps that we've identified today. So thank you so much for your time. We are just doing the feedback and just hold on.
Thank you so much.
Thank
this was
you.
really, really insightful. And I hope that all our participants also found it really insightful as well. So we just handed out a feedback form. It's just to see what you learned, what you liked, and what we could improve as well. So please just take about 5 to 10 minutes to answer that. And then once you're done, we have food on the table behind. You can just help yourself to it. And also take a break, go to the washroom if you want. The washrooms are just over here and then to your left. And you'll see a sign, it'll say washroom. Okay.
I want to acknowledge these people. Renee, I don't know what you guys said about me when I wasn't here. Good. So, oh, microphone, okay. See, I have practice. I know how to do this. See, I've been speaking. I came from somewhere speaking, so I'm a little frazzled, but that's okay. So I want to thank all of you for answering my calls. So Renee, where did we come from? Renee was a young staff, brand new staff, when she worked on with my team. So I'm very proud to say that I heard that you are in supervisory position now, and that just tickles me pink. And thank you for honoring my call. So when we talk about you kids and what we're trying to impact in you in preparation for your future, I think Renee being here and Ismat being here speaks to that, because I met them when they were starting out in their career. And I happened to be, what was I when I met you?
You were my manager.
I was your manager. Yep. And
actually, I shared my personal story with all of you, and I talked about meeting an alternative measures officer. Moji was that officer. Wow. Such a small world. We didn't realize that until I started working at CYOC, and one day we were just talking. And we figured out that she was the officer that I met that day. Amazing. Yeah.
So this brings me full circle, because it shows the story I tell all the time, that when you meet people, it is very important to leave them with positive experience. And this is why we do what we do, to leave people with positive experience, because you never know where you will meet that person again, or how you will meet that person again, or you may not even meet that person again, but somebody that's dear to you may meet that person. And I'm so happy that we were at a crossroad that I could call up these people and they answered. I only gave them, 1 week notice? And even though I wasn't going to be here with most part of it, they still came and they showed up. And I met Ninette. I met you when Eve, was it? When Eve was doing stuff? No. I met Ninette long before that. Through lots of events in the community. Yeah. But our first one was that barbecue at CACC. Yes. Yeah. Stampede barbecue.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you for honoring us. So it's important that we carry on in life, but we carry on with a clear vision. The clear vision is, as you pour into other people, you meet people that will pour into you. And it's very important to us at TMT Learning Foundation that we keep pouring into you kids, so that you can be a better and the most productive version of yourself as you grow up into adulthood. Thank you.